PR Connections Radio presents.
Welcome to Vegas Hockey Hub here on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media. I'm your host, Ian Rachiele. And on this edition, we are going to be talking about the Brandon Wheat Kings, a team in the Western Hockey League. And more importantly, what we are going to be discussing is talking about its impact and how it helped build your Vegas Golden Knights. That's going to be a really fun episode to talk about and really break down here on Vegas Hockey Hub. And this is going to be very exciting. A really great show that we're going to be talking about here. Now, as we're going to be getting into this here on Vegas Hockey Hub with your host, Ian Rachiele, I do have to mention that when it comes to the Vegas Golden Knights, that here on Vegas Hockey Hub, go to PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media, and check out all of the fantastic content we have on the network. We have about a dozen shows on here, including Vegas Hockey Hub. So my recommendation is go to the website, PRConnectionsRadio.com, and check out all of the amazing content. Also, go to our social medias at Vegas Hockey Hub. We are on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. We are everywhere. And follow your host at Ian J. Rachiele. And finally, we're going to actually give a shout out real quick to paidperletter.com, which is the sponsor of PR Connections Radio. If you can go to the website, PRConnectionsRadio.com, and then click on the link to paidperletter.com and use the underscore Uncle Dan to get started. So go to paidperletter.com/Uncle Dan and get paid per letter. So the Brandon Wheat Kings, now to establish what they are, to really kind of set up what the Brandon Wheat Kings are all about, they are a team in the Western Hockey League. They're a junior hockey team out there in Canada. The Brandon Wheat Kings out in Manitoba. Now, with the Brandon Wheat Kings, it's really interesting how they have a direct correlation to your Vegas Golden Knights. How the Brandon Wheat Kings helped mold and help build the Vegas Golden Knights. As a matter of fact, there is not just one way they're connected to the Vegas Golden Knights, but there are 5 different ways that the Brandon Wheat Kings are connected to your Vegas Golden Knights. And we're going to be breaking that down. We're going to be talking about it here on Vegas Hockey Hub. So there's going to be a lot of fun stuff that we're going to be talking about and breaking down. So it's going to be a really fun show. A lot of stuff that we're going to talk about and break down on this edition of Vegas Hockey Hub. And with the Brandon Wheat Kings, we're going to start out with the first, and that is the first one that we're going to be breaking down and talking about is from the front office perspective. Okay? The front office perspective is the biggest reason and one of the biggest connections to the Vegas Golden Knights. As the Brandon Wheat Kings, they have a direct correlation to the general manager of your Vegas Golden Knights, and we're talking about Kelly McCrimmon. Kelly McCrimmon has a really good connection to the Brandon Wheat Kings. And if you're asking yourself, how is that so? Well, let's break it down here on the show. Kelly McCrimmon got his first coaching job with the Brandon Wheat Kings. He also was an assistant coach with the Brandon Wheat Kings. He also became a general manager for the Brandon Wheat Kings. And more importantly, Kelly McCrimmon was at one point in time the sole owner of the Brandon Wheat Kings. Kelly McCrimmon ran the day-to-day operations. That was his baby. That is what he was doing with an organization like the Brandon Wheat Kings. Now, the Brandon Wheat Kings, he was with them from 1988 to 2015. Okay? He was with the Brandon Wheat Kings for so long, and he was also a big reason for why they did so great. It was a reason why the Brandon Wheat Kings were so good for so long. He was a big part of doing that. Now, when it came to the Brandon Wheat Kings itself, he was no longer the general manager, as he actually ended up becoming he actually ended up stepping down from the general manager duties after a while is now by a former hockey player in Marty Murray. And then around the early 2010s, he stepped down from his coaching duties. And at this present moment in time, their head coach is Marty Murray. So for the Brandon Wheat Kings, Kelly McCrimmon was a huge deal. He was a massive part of what the Brandon Wheat Kings did. This is the same Kelly McCrimmon who won championships with the Brandon Wheat Kings. Okay, I want everyone to understand that. The Brandon Wheat Kings have won multiple titles in the Western Hockey League. They won a title in 96 and in 2015. They've also won 3 playoff championships. Once again, 2 of them with Kelly McCrimmon at the helm in 96 and in 2015. So why does this matter? Why does it matter that Kelly McCrimmon ended up helping the Brandon Wheat Kings out? Why did it matter that Kelly McCrimmon got them to the Memorial Cup 3 different times as the head of the Brandon Wheat Kings? The reason why it matters is because Kelly McCrimmon was scouting. He was developing. He was helping these guys progress in junior hockey. The Brandon Wheat Kings was an established team in the Ontario Hockey League out there. And more importantly, with Kelly McCrimmon, he had a good amount of players from his time while being the head coach and general manager of the Brandon Wheat Kings that eventually found their way to being here in Vegas. Okay? I want everyone to really understand that. When it comes to Kelly McCrimmon, this is a guy who went on in the last season he was as a head coach in the Western Hockey League. He wins the Western Hockey League championship, and then he loses in the Memorial Cup in that situation there. But more importantly, when it comes to the Brandon Wheat Kings, and this is something very valuable that I do want to mention, there are 4 players who came over from the Brandon Wheat Kings, who came over from Brandon, Manitoba, that found their way to being on the Vegas Golden Knights roster. There are 4 players who are currently with the Golden Knights organization. And the first one that we are going to be discussing, first player that we are going to be breaking down, is somebody who actually has been a solid contributor for the Vegas Golden Knights over the last couple of years. This is someone who probably doesn't get that much attention, but he has done a stellar job over the last couple of years, and that is, of course, Zach Whitecloud. Zach Whitecloud, who was born in Brandon, Manitoba. Some people are going to sit here and go, well, why is Zach Whitecloud going to be the first one there? Well, I'm actually going to be talking about the other 3 very soon, but I just want to start with him. Because he was born in Brandon, Manitoba, his family, they also helped out the Brandon Wheat Kings. They were kind of donors, backers to the Brandon Wheat Kings. His family was. So there was good ties to Zach Whitecloud and the Brandon Wheat Kings. He also played for the midget team of the Brandon Wheat Kings for 2 seasons. So for Zach Whitecloud, this is a guy who grew up and was out there in the Brandon Wheat Kings situation. Once again, his family was donors / backers to the Brandon Wheat Kings. So they would have some bit of a connection there with Kelly McCrimmon. And Zach Whitecloud has become a solid 3rd defensive pairing here in Vegas. He has done that the last couple of seasons. And more importantly, for your Vegas Golden Knights, Zach Whitecloud became a Stanley Cup champion. Zach Whitecloud went from an undrafted free agent who the Golden Knights signed back in 2018 to a couple of years later being an everyday starter and being a Stanley Cup champion for your Vegas Golden Knights. So that was the first player that kind of came up with the Brandon Wheat Kings, and that is Zach Whitecloud because of the connections there. The second player with the Brandon Wheat Kings that does have connections to them, and that is with the Vegas Golden Knights. This one is actually a bit interesting because of the fact that the Vegas Golden Knights, they have had him for a while. They drafted him back in 2017, and he has been kind of floating back and forth between the NHL and the AHL. And the second player that I'm talking about, who we have actually done a player profile on here on Vegas Hockey Hub, is Jiri Patara. So Jiri Patara, this is somebody who has really taken off and has really shown that he can be a steady hand with the Vegas Golden Knights. This is a guy who was drafted in the 6th round, 2017, came from the Brandon Wheat Kings, and was there and actually served pretty well with the Brandon Wheat Kings over his time period there. This is the same Jiri Patara that when you look at what he did in the Brandon Wheat Kings, he was named the goaltender of the year in the 2019-2020 Western Hockey League season. Is also the same person who over the last couple of years has developed and progressed in Vegas. And when he's had his limited opportunities to play in the NHL for the Vegas Golden Knights, he has risen up. He has done pretty well, and he has shown flashes of potential while suiting up for the Golden Knights. Now, when it comes to Jiri Patara, this is somebody who, playing in Henderson, playing in the AHL, he has done stellar over the last 4 years. He's had some up and downs, but he's done some pretty solid work there. But overall, the Brandon Wheat Kings getting a goalie from them who was kind of around that system and someone who was around the Brandon Wheat Kings and was very familiar with that system really just tells you about the young talent that was around here while Kelly McCrimmon was building the roster, while Kelly McCrimmon was helping establish the Brandon Wheat Kings. And I also have to give a lot of credit and respect to the Brandon Wheat Kings organization, because when it comes to talent in the NHL, there are so many players who are not Vegas Golden Knights related, but they have done pretty solid for themselves in the NHL currently. And, for example, Dustin Byfuglien, he is someone who immediately comes to mind when I think about the Brandon Wheat Kings. I think of a guy like Dustin Byfuglien. Another person who immediately comes to mind when it comes to how well the Brandon Wheat Kings have done in terms of talent is the former Philadelphia Flyers goaltender Ron Hextall. And more importantly, Travis Hamonic as well is another player that I kind of think of on that level when it comes to the Brandon Wheat Kings and what they have done over the last couple of decades and what they've done overall with the Brandon Wheat Kings. So what have we discussed so far? We talked about Kelly McCrimmon. That was the first one, right? Kelly McCrimmon, he was the general manager. He was the head coach. He was the sole owner of the Brandon Wheat Kings. We know this. We talked about Zach Whitecloud. Zach Whitecloud coming from Brandon, Manitoba. He has that connection there. And then Jiri Patara, who actually played a few seasons for the Brandon Wheat Kings before coming over to play professional hockey and playing in the ECHL, AHL, and eventually the NHL with your Vegas Golden Knights. Well, before we get to the two final players that had a huge impact on the Vegas Golden Knights, I mean, these two have essentially been the co-MVPs for the Vegas Golden Knights, and they both came from the same junior hockey team that just so happened to help out the Vegas Golden Knights. I want to give you two players who are not on the Golden Knights anymore, but they were part of the Brandon Wheat Kings. These are two former players who Kelly McCrimmon, no doubt, saw the talent in and brought him over to the Vegas Golden Knights over a certain time period. The first one is former second overall pick Nolan Patrick. Nolan Patrick, who was drafted in 2017 by the Philadelphia Flyers. He was with the Brandon Wheat Kings for 4 seasons, had a stellar junior career, had a fantastic resume, went second overall to Philadelphia. But some people forget that Nolan Patrick, he actually signed a 2-year deal with the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, we know that he played the first season in Vegas. He wore number 41. He was a middle six forward for Vegas. Nolan Patrick actually did somewhat reasonable when he was on the ice, considering what his expectations were as a middle six forward. The problem that Nolan Patrick had was the same problem he had in Philly. He had the talent. We all knew it. Everyone who knows hockey, he had the talent out there. The problem that Nolan Patrick has had is his injuries. Nolan Patrick is someone who had $1 million worth of talent, but his body just could not hold up. And unfortunately for Vegas, that's what ended up happening, as he had pretty much a career-ending injury against the Colorado Avalanche, and he would end up only playing 25 games in his first season in Vegas. And then the second year, he'd be on long-term IR throughout the entire season. Now, interesting enough, when the Vegas Golden Knights won the Stanley Cup, they did not choose to ask for an exemption to have his name be on the Stanley Cup. There was an option to do that, because remember, he signed that 2-year deal. So because he was on long-term IR, because he's still getting paid by the team, there was an option to actually include him on the Stanley Cup championship that they chose not to. Now, the unfortunate story about Nolan Patrick is that after his 2 years were up, he was not renewed, he was not brought back, and unfortunately, he has retired from the NHL. It was announced that Nolan Patrick, at the age of 25, would not be playing ever again in the NHL. So really sad story there. But when it comes to Nolan Patrick, he has to be an honorable mention because of his connection to Kelly McCrimmon, and more importantly, his role with the Brandon Wheat Kings, and the fact that he was a former second overall pick by the Philadelphia Flyers. So yeah, Nolan Patrick, very unfortunate story to what happened to him at the end of his career, but he did play for Vegas. And the second honorable mention, who's now playing in Toronto, but he was a fan favorite here in Vegas, and that is Ryan Reaves. That's Revo. Revo is a former Brandon Wheat King. He was with Brandon Wheat Kings for 3 seasons in the mid-2000s. And what is interesting about that is that in 2017, 2018, the Vegas Golden Knights at the trade deadline, they would acquire Ryan Reaves and have him be a fourth-line winger for the Vegas Golden Knights. And a lot of people actually realize that one of the main reasons why Kelly McCrimmon brought in Ryan Reaves is because of his connection to the Brandon Wheat Kings. Because Ryan Reaves was on those same teams with the Brandon Wheat Kings, that helped establish a connection there between the two. And because of that, he played 3.5 seasons with your Vegas Golden Knights. He was a fan favorite. He was beloved by the Golden Knights and by the community here. And, Ryan Reaves, unfortunately, he did have to leave. He went off to New York Rangers, the Minnesota Wild, the Toronto Maple Leafs, stuff like that. But Ryan Reaves being a fan favorite, he will not be forgotten here in Vegas, that's for sure. But yes, Ryan Reaves, a former Brandon Wheat King for your Vegas Golden Knights. Now, the last 2 players your Vegas Golden Knights have had who have a connection to the Brandon Wheat Kings. The first player, I'm going to leave for last. But the second player is your captain. The second player is your leader in the locker room. And your second player is someone who has helped lead your Vegas Golden Knights to a Stanley Cup championship. Of course, I am talking about number 61, Mark Stone. Now, some people do not remember this. Some people do not understand this. But yes, Mark Stone was with the Brandon Wheat Kings for 4 seasons. And Mark Stone ended up putting 120 points in his final season in juniors. And who was his general manager when he put up 120 points? Kelly McCrimmon. Who was the head coach of the Brandon Wheat Kings when Mark Stone had 230 30 points in 2 seasons? That was Kelly McCrimmon. So it's really no shock, and it really should be no surprise that Mark Stone in 2019, Kelly McCrimmon, he picks up the phone, he calls Ottawa, and he gets and reunites with his former Brandon Wheat King player in Mark Stone. Mark Stone is a huge impact player. He has been for almost his entire career out there in Ottawa and then here in Vegas. I mean, in his 4.5 years that he has played in Vegas, Mark Stone has done an incredible job, just an amazing job in general with your Vegas Golden Knights. And in the 5 years that Mark Stone has been an impact player, he has been someone who you can count on when he's on the ice. Mark Stone's a captain for a reason. The people like him. The players trust him. The organization always wants to see what his impact is, what his insight is. Mark Stone is probably one of the best players the Golden Knights have ever acquired in their franchise history. I mean, if you wanted to make a list and you actually do talk about the 5 most impactful additions to the Vegas Golden Knights, Mark Stone would have to be on that list. I mean, who else could it be? I mean, think about it. You have Jonathan Marchessault, you have Marc-Andre Fleury, you have Jack Eichel, you have Mark Stone, and who would be the 5th? Like, in your opinion, who would be the 5th most important addition to the Golden Knights? Eichel, Fleury, Stone, Marchessault. Well, then who would be the 5th, right? Like, would it be Pietrangelo? You can make an argument there that he was an impactful addition to the Golden Knights in franchise history. Some people are going to try to say maybe William Karlsson, and if you want to go that route, I 100% will not say that you're wrong. I mean, there's so many impactful players in Golden Knights history, but the point of the video and the point of this story is that Mark Stone has been an impact player, and he has been someone that you can count on in Vegas, and his connection to Kelly McCrimmon was a huge reason why he got brought over, and because of the Brandon Wheat Kings, that's a huge indicator and a huge reason why Mark Stone is a Vegas Golden Knight. And the first player, the MVP of the 2023-2024 season, Logan Thompson, is a Brandon Wheat King. Yes, so many people do not remember or do not recall that Logan Thompson was with the Brandon Wheat Kings for 4 years. In fact, Brandon Wheat Kings, when they won their championship, and they actually won the Western Hockey League championship and went to the Memorial Cup, Logan Thompson was one of the goaltenders that was there for the Brandon Wheat Kings. So very impactful there. So Logan Thompson goes from being someone who is sharing the net with the Brandon Wheat Kings, and then he goes from being in there to going to the ECHL, going to the AHL. This is someone who kind of bounced around for a little bit. But more importantly, with Logan Thompson, this is somebody that when you really study and kind of analyze what the Brandon Wheat Kings did, this was a team that he helped with that organization. Funny enough, by the way, his goalie mate that the Brandon Wheat Kings had when they did go to the Memorial Cup was Jordan Papirny. And where is Jordan Papirny at right now? If you guessed the Henderson Silver Knights, congratulations. If you guessed the ECHL/AHL of your Vegas Golden Knights, that would be correct. So, even though he is not an NHL player, he actually still had connections to the Vegas Golden Knights as their 2 goaltenders from those years that they were in the WHL championship and they ended up winning with them. That was actually one of the main reasons why. So very cool story there. Really interesting when it comes to that situation. When you talk about who the 2 goalies were, both of them are part of the Golden Knights organization. Kind of a cool moment there when you really stop and analyze it. But, with your Vegas Golden Knights, I really sit here and go, the Brandon Wheat Kings helped build and it really helped establish the mold of what the Vegas Golden Knights have. If you really study and look at the Golden Knights roster in 2024, as we are in March right now, when you look at the Vegas Golden Knights, this is a roster that has a direct correlation and has a connection forever to the Brandon Wheat Kings, because Kelly McCrimmon is the Golden Knights general manager. You have two goalies in Logan Thompson and Yuri Patera, who came from the Brandon Wheat Kings. You have a defenseman, a young defenseman, who came from Brandon, Manitoba, in Zach Whitecloud. And you have your MVP, your captain, in Mark Stone, who was with the Brandon Wheat Kings. So really this roster, a lot of it's been built off of the backbone, off of the foundation that the Brandon Wheat Kings have had when Kelly McCrimmon was the general manager and head coach in the Western Hockey League. So this is just really a cool video. I just wanted to do this very quickly and just kind of mention the Brandon Wheat Kings, because there's really not many people probably have established or connected to the fact that the Brandon Wheat Kings have a really solid connection to your Vegas Golden Knights. There is a firm kind of situation there that a lot of people are not aware of. So that's what we wanted to do on this episode, and really talk about and break down how the Brandon Wheat Kings have helped establish the Vegas Golden Knights. And there's two more players that really I want to talk about before we get off the air, because they were part of the Brandon Wheat Kings, but they did not make the NHL. The first one was Reed Duke. Reed Duke, who is the first ever player to be signed by the Vegas Golden Knights. He spent 3 seasons with the Brandon Wheat Kings, and he actually spent 5 seasons in minor league hockey with the Vegas Golden Knights. He was in the AHL playing for Chicago and Henderson. He was a good middle six guy in the AHL, but that's really all he was. Now he is playing overseas. Good for him. But yeah, the Brandon Wheat Kings, unfortunately, Reed Duke, who was their first ever free agent signing, the first ever player they did pick up, unfortunately, it just did not make the NHL. But Reed Duke still matters, still does count, because he was a Brandon Wheat King who did come to the Vegas Golden Knights. So I just wanted to mention him, because some people do not remember, or some people maybe do not realize that their first ever signing was a Brandon Wheat King. That's kind of a cool moment there. And then the second honorable mention, because we got about 2 minutes left before we go off the air, with the Brandon Wheat Kings and how they help build your Vegas Golden Knights. And the second person is Ryan Craig. Ryan Craig, who is a former Brandon Wheat King, he is the current head coach of the Henderson Silver Knights. So that is correct. The current head coach of the Henderson Silver Knights was a former Brandon Wheat King. So him being part of the Golden Knights organization has no doubt a correlation to the fact that Kelly McCrimmon at one point in time was Ryan Craig's head coach and general manager in the Brandon Wheat Kings. So really stopping and analyzing this right now, I will say with the Brandon Wheat Kings, this was a fantastic way to break this down. A lot of fun talking about this here on Vegas Hockey Hub. And until next time, I'm your host, Ian Rachiele. Continue watching hockey, go support junior hockey, and go Knights, go.